A man once said if you want a good story, just ask any random person if there was ever an event in their life they cannot explain. Someone almost always has one weird thing that has happened to them. So Reddit, regardless of what you believe about the world, what's your story? I'm an ER doctor currently. When I was in med school, we had a chronic respiratory failure patient who was DNR/DNI. During our morning rounds, nurse called us to bedside for vital sign check. Guy was deader than a block of wood. No pulse, no breathing, pupils fixed and dilated, etc. My senior resident was like, "This is a great chance for you to confirm your first dead body." We write up his death note, make arrangements, whatever. An hour later, we get called by the same nurse. This guy is alive and talking to me. Sure enough, homeboy is wide awake and chatty Cathy. He got discharged a few days later. I kept tabs on him until I finished med school. He lived at least another year and a half. When I was a teenager, I got really into fortune telling as a form of entertainment, but I put on a good show. And my best friend bought me this pack of Titania's Oracle cards. I practiced with these by doing readings for friends. I really liked the artwork on them, and people always read what they want into it. One day I did a 2-week ahead reading for my friend Richard. The man and the dog came up. I said this indicated a close male friend. Then the coffin card. I said, "Don't worry, this usually means a period of waiting. It only means death if it's drawn next to the scythe card." I shouldn't have told him that. The next card was the scythe. The reading basically said a close male friend would die within the next 2 weeks. I tried to backpedal and say it could mean a new phase in your friendship, but I could see he was a bit upset by this. I felt awful. This was meant to be fun. Well, I caught up with Richard a couple of weeks later. His best friend had died. He and I kind of drifted apart as friends after that. It was a horrible coincidence. Me and a friend saw a teeny tiny person. This was in the 90s, and there was a really nice pub about a mile from where my friend Jason lived, and the walk there from his house took us along one of the canals. This was in England, the West Midlands to be precise. One evening, I'd gone over to his house. We'd walked over to the pub, had a couple of pints, something to eat, and were on our way back. It wasn't late, early evening and still a decent amount of light. We're walking down the track beside the canal when we hear a splash in the water behind us. Turning around, we see, about 40 feet away, the ripples of something moving through the canal towards the bank. Now, both of us were keen bird watchers at the time, so we were guessing it was something like a coot or a moorhen. So we were both pretty shocked when what looked like a tiny little naked-ass man, about 8 inches tall, climbed out of the water, shook himself off, and dashed into the hedgerow. We were both frozen for a few moments before we headed to the spot where the little man had gotten out of the water. Didn't find any trace of him. We got back to Jason's place and spent a couple of hours trying to rationalize it, but there was no other animal or bird that we could think of that we might mistake for a tiny person. Not me, my father. From his perspective. When I was young, probably 12 or 13, my family lived in a small residential suburb. There was a street lamp right across the street from us that would shine into our living room window at night. So every night before we went to bed, my father would draw the curtains. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. and went to the kitchen to get some water. As I passed through the living room, I noticed a beam of light from the street lamp had made it through a small gap between the curtains, and I had the urge to peek through. Standing under the streetlight was a tall man with a black cap, silver skin, and massive eyes. Those huge bug eyes that you see in alien movies. He was standing there motionless and staring right at me. I quickly ducked down behind my father's recliner. There was no way he could have seen me. The house was completely dark and I barely moved the curtains as I looked through. After a few minutes of sitting on the floor behind the recliner, I grew curious to see if the man had passed. I looked through the curtains again. Pressed firmly against the other side of the glass, inches away from my face, was the silver man with bug eyes, staring right at me. After a moment, frozen in terror, I ran through the house towards my father's room and woke him up, quickly telling him what happened. He grabbed his shotgun and went outside to look around. He didn't find anyone, but there was a set of fresh footprints in the dew that had been collecting on the lawn. My father has recounted this story to me exactly twice, and even though it happened to him some 40 years ago, I could still see the goosebumps on his arms as he recalled the experience. This isn't mine, but my grandma's and my mom's. I was a child, I'm guessing 5 or 6. We were on holiday in a coastal town in England and had gone to the beach. It was summer, but this is the UK, so it was one of those days that was warm enough to sit on the beach for a bit, but not really warm enough to do the whole go in the sea, sunbathing thing. So they were sat up watching me play in the sand, and I set my mind to building a super big sand castle. Being a kid, it was soon decided that I needed a moat for the castle. Cue me going backwards and forwards to the sea to get water and becoming gradually annoyed/perplexed that the water just kept soaking in. The beach wasn't busy. There were other families there, some singular sunbathers, but reasonably spaced out. Anyway, my grandma and my mom saw this one chap walk into the beach and immediately got vibes from him. They didn't know why. I mean, yeah, the guy was on his own, but that doesn't immediately make someone questionable. There were lots of lone swimmers doing their daily exercise, for example. But no, there was something unsettling about him, despite him looking distinctly average. Late 30s, early 40s, brown hair, light-skinned, of average weight and height. The only thing my grandma really picked up on was his piercing eyes, whatever that means. Still, they had a feeling they couldn't explain. The man placed himself 6 meters or so away from me as I was pottering in the sand, and my mom and grandma carried on chatting, but something in them told them not to take their eyes from this chap who was sat on the sand, picking up sand and letting it run through his fingers. After a while, he too started making a castle. At that point, something freaked my mom out enough to call me over and say we were leaving to do something else now. I was cross. I was very happy making my beautiful castle. The thing my mom couldn't shake was the feeling that the guy was trying to attract my attention by doing childlike activities. But she had nothing to go on and felt as though she was being paranoid. Anyway, the rest of our coastal holiday went by without issue. We didn't see him again, that is, until a week or two later, when he'd been arrested. This guy's face was in the paper and on the news for abducting a young girl the same age as me. I've tried to Google it. This would have been early to mid-90s, and I can't find coverage, so I'm guessing the child was returned safely. I'll have to ask my grandma and see if she remembers exactly where it was, as I don't, and my mom passed away a year or so after this happened, so can't ask her. If I find an article, I'll update. My girlfriend had a black stone heart ring she'd wear when I met her, but it would occasionally somehow fall off despite being a tight fit, only to be found in odd places days later. Eventually, she tied it on a leather strap and gave it to me to wear around my neck. It was a very tight fit over my head as it was a bit short. It was an effort to get it on or off, but we joked that at least I wouldn't lose it. One day, we were packing up the family holiday home we'd sold, 2 hours from home, and while loading furniture into the trailer, I must have snapped the tight strap and lost it. We only realized halfway home. Searched the trailer as we unloaded, but no sign. We'd sold the holiday house, so no one we knew could even go look for it, so we finally accepted this time it was lost for good. 2 years later, my dad was mowing the lawn on the ride-on at home, and he went to our paddock to empty it. He got off, emptied the clippings, but when he got back on and reached for the gear stick, something sharpish greeted his grip. The ring was sitting balanced on the top of the gear stick. The leather string wound down the gear lever, but still intact, not snapped. He was alone in the middle of the paddock. We have no idea how it got there 2 years later, 150 kilometers from where it was lost. I asked my now wife where it came from originally. She found it in a kooky little pop-up shop of witchy-type things. It was the only ring there and was apparently also the only second-hand item they had for sale. The kicker here, I put it in my wooden box of special items so we'd never lose it again. I went to get it to show someone a few years ago, and it wasn't there anymore. In Colorado, there's a place called Rocky Flats that made the plutonium cores for nukes back in the day. Theoretically, it's shut down now. It's just off a highway that runs between Golden and Boulder, which both have colleges. One night back in college, I'm driving that highway at about 2 a.m. It's dark and completely deserted except for me, but that's pretty normal at that time. I crest a hill near Rocky Flats, and there's a shit ton of flashing lights surrounding a huge, slow-moving, flat truck-like thing with a big-ass covered bundle on it. We're talking something out of an alien UFO movie. This whole ensemble takes up most of the highway and is slowly moving towards me at maybe 5 miles per hour. I'm starting to freak out a bit because it's 2 a.m. and I had a crazy night, and what the hell am I even seeing? When the loudest police warning horn I have ever heard got blasted at me, along with a shit ton of high beams. I did a U-turn in the middle of the highway and floored it. I have no idea what they were moving, and I don't want to know.